I was at a playground recently, one of these really high-end nature-themed places in a Tier 1 city, and I was watching this father with his son, who must have been about 5. And he wasn't just, pushing a swing. He was meticulously timing his son's reaction speeds. He had a professional stopwatch and was logging the data into a spreadsheet on his iPad.
Wow, at a playground.
Yeah, I mean, the man looked exhausted, but there was this intense, almost clinical focus in his eyes. So I kind of joked, super dad, huh? And he didn't smile.
Oh, right.
Not at all. He looked at me, completely deadpan, and said, I'm not here to play. I'm here to ensure his survival.
Yeah.
If I don't install the right firmware now, he's just another data point in a decaying system.
Firmware.
Yeah.
That's chilling for a 5-year-old on a Saturday.
It was. And it cuts right through this narrative we see, right? The headlines about the new Chinese father, the men who are finally stepping up, embracing what looks like, Western-style gender equality.
Right, this heartwarming story of progress.
Exactly. We want to believe it's this great shift. But when you look closer, that warmth, it feels like a very cold, strategic calculation. This elite father, he's treating his life like a laboratory for what you could call educational Darwinism.
Well, just a few miles away, you have the other reality.
The other reality. A factory supervisor is missing his daughter's 3rd birthday because the industrial engine just doesn't pause for milestones. And he's not backward or stuck in the past. He's just the physical fuel for a system that absolutely demands his absence.
So you have this jarring contradiction. The intensive father on one side deploying himself like a piece of high-value capital to give his kid competitive edge.
And on the other, the invisible father, whose traditional role is just mandated by the sheer physical gravity of his job. So is this return of fatherhood really about liberation, or is it something else? A desperate defensive maneuver? What if this progressive dad isn't a feminist at all, but a soldier building a fortress against, a digital deluge?
That opening story it immediately cuts through all the soft ideological talk we usually have around fatherhood and social change.
Right.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really analyze this sharp class-based stratification. We have to look at this supposed return of fatherhood, not as some gentle lifestyle choice, not just a simple shift towards equality,
but as something else.
as a structural adaptation. The family unit is changing under tremendous, intense systemic pressure. Essentially, we're asking you to consider how these extreme economic survival strategies, which are completely different depending on your social class, are dictating the shape and function of the modern family. They're creating 2 entirely separate realities for fathers.
Okay, let's unpack that, starting with the elite, because that father timing reaction speeds, that's so telling. We've seen data, right? A pretty significant surge in paternal childcare.
About a 35% increase among the upper middle class in those first-tier cities.
On the surface, that looks like progress, but you're suggesting the motivation is, darker, more strategic.
It's less about it being dark and more about it being rational, but rational under duress. We have to see this surge through the lens of what some call educational Darwinism. For this high-resource group, the family is operating like a highly optimized strategic unit.
And the father's presence isn't just a nice to have.
It is not a casual optional input. It's a tactical deployment in a high-stakes intergenerational war for scarce resources.
So what makes the father's input so uniquely valuable in this war? I mean, if the goal is just maximizing human capital, why not outsource more of it? The wealthy can certainly afford tutors, nannies, all of that.
Because the elite have identified a critical, non-outsourceable algorithm for success. They understand the unique value of masculine influence in cultivating very specific competitive dispositions in their children.
You're talking about things like
resilience, logical rigor, which is absolutely essential for STEM fields, and strategic ambition. These aren't skills you just learn in a classroom by rote. They are cultivated through intense, structured, high-status interaction.
So the father isn't just coming home to read a bedtime story. He's coming home to coach a specific mindset. His return is a calculated redeployment of his own high-value human capital to what you called the second front, the home.
Exactly. It's an intergenerational upgrade, reinforcing the civilizational firmware.
That phrase, civilizational firmware, is incredibly intense. What does that actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon? Is it just supervising homework, or is it deeper?
It is profoundly deeper. The firmware isn't the operating system, the curriculum. It's the underlying code. It dictates how the child processes the world.
So it's about the ethos.
It's about instilling the ethos of the cognitive elite. When that father is timing his son's reaction speed, he's installing a mindset that performance is quantifiable, that weaknesses are just data points to be analyzed and fixed, that self-regulation is the key to mastering chaos. It's about cultivating a competitive disposition, the ability to handle pressure, to analyze failure clinically, and to project future strategic moves. It's the constant reinforcement of the idea that their personal value is directly linked to their measurable cognitive performance.
This kind of intense micromanagement, it has to be rooted in some immense anxiety about the future, about global economic volatility. It really sounds like this intensive parenting is, at its core, a class defense mechanism.
That's the core thesis. This behavior is a direct, rational response to acute cognitive stratification. They are securing intergenerational advantages in human capital because the consequences of failure, of slipping down the ladder, are catastrophic.
To understand that urgency, you have to bring in the concept of positional goods, right?
Exactly. The classic economic idea from Fred Hirsch back in the 70s.
Can you just quickly break that down for anyone who might not be familiar? How does it relate to a kid's education?
Sure. Positional goods get their value from their scarcity and social exclusiveness, not from their absolute utility. The satisfaction you get from them comes from holding a rank that other people can't reach.
In education, that's incredibly stark.
It is. When everyone gets a high school diploma, its value goes down. When everyone gets a college degree, the value of that degree plummets. It's credential inflation.
So 50 years ago, a college degree was a golden ticket to the middle class. Today, it's just a ticket to stand in line.
Precisely. The really desirable jobs, the positions of power and influence in the knowledge economy, they are scarce. They're subject to intense congestion. The limits to growth aren't just economic anymore, they're profoundly social.
And so the elite family has to engage in ranking strategies.
That's the game. Their goal isn't just to educate their child well, it's to secure a high standing in the relentless competition for those scarce positions. Their child's eventual market value is entirely relative to their competitors.
Which brings us back to that example you shared, Mr. Chen, the senior tech executive in Beijing. His whole approach isn't just about scheduling, it's a strategic roadmap.
A roadmap designed to bypass that congestion and secure a place for his son in the cognitive elite. And look closely at where his investment goes. It's so far beyond simple academics.
Right, he's curating a whole
social ecosystem for his son. We're talking specialized high-end coding camps to secure that logical rigor. Fencing lessons to cultivate disciplined aggression.
Physical confidence.
Exactly. And weekend retreats with established industry leaders. That's not for fun. That's early-stage networking and soft skill development. This is about securing the mental resilience and, crucially, the network needed to navigate a volatile world. They know that connections can often outrank credentials.
So it sounds like he's translating his own abstract social and cultural capital, the high status attitudes and preferences he has, into something concrete and immediately marketable for his son. This is what some research calls personal capital.
Personal capital is that precise alchemy. It's the combination of hard credentials degrees from hyper-elite schools fused with those intangible soft attributes. Cultural fluency, critical thinking, strategic networking, proven resilience.
And then that whole package is meticulously wrapped in a compelling, marketable employability narrative.
The whole process is actively designed to distinguish their children in a massively saturated, competitive labor market. They're playing a very sophisticated game of distinction.
But wait a minute, doesn't this hyper-intensive style, doesn't it run the risk of backfiring? If the goal is resilience and independence, doesn't constant coaching and spreadsheets and curating an entire ecosystem just lead to burnout, to dependency, a lack of authentic self-determination?
That is the calculated risk. It's absolutely inherent in this system. But the anxiety of downward mobility is so high that the short-term goal securing that initial positional advantage, it outweighs the long-term psychological risks.
So they're betting on the idea that once their kid is at the top, they'll figure out how to stay there.
They view the market as a sorting mechanism where initial advantages are compounded. If their child secures a spot at the top, they believe the resilience needed to maintain that spot will develop naturally. And let's be clear, social class inequalities are crucial here. Those with a secure socioeconomic base are just better equipped to strategically manage these trajectories, even if it requires a degree of parental over-engineering.
And the research in China backs this up. There's data from 1978 to 2010 showing a very robust dual-track model of elite reproduction.
Yes. Whether the parents were state elites or market elites, both groups were highly effective at passing down their advantageous status.
So this fortress building, it's relentless, but it's also effective.
It is. This elite parenting is a fierce, almost desperate defense against the constant threat of downward social mobility. They're maneuvering in a world where economic stagnation for them isn't just a decrease in income. It means crashing out of the cognitive class entirely. Their anxiety, even if it's expressed in these extreme clinical ways, is a perfectly rational response to a hyper-competitive economic reality.
So we've established the intense, calculated presence of the elite father who deploys his flexible, high-value time strategically. Now we have to turn to the other end of the spectrum, the domain defined by the physical gravity of labor.
The vast majority of fathers.
This is the factory supervisor from the opening, the one who missed his daughter's 3rd birthday.
It's the necessary and painful contrast. What looks like backward ideology, the persistence of the traditional male breadwinner model, is in fact a rational, structural response to economic survival in the physical economy.
We have to discard the simple assumption that these working-class fathers are just rejecting modern social progress.
Absolutely. Their lives are dictated by constraints, not by choice.
And that distinction is crucial. We're not talking about men who refuse to engage. We're talking about men who are physically and temporally consumed by their labor. The structural limitations are just profound.
Their productive labor in manufacturing, logistics, construction, basic services, it's fundamentally physical. These jobs are inherently inelastic.
Meaning they're bound to a specific place, a rigid time schedule, a required physical output.
There's no digital nomad flexibility, no remote work. You can't supervise a factory floor or drive a delivery truck from your home office while your child does a coding lesson. The knowledge economy offers flexibility to the elite father. The real economy imposes iron constraints on the working class father.
And the systemic loss of family time is the cost. It's the trade-off required to maintain the high efficiency of the industrial base that underpins the whole economic system.
Exactly. The gender division of labor in these households is dictated less by some patriarchal preference and more by the immovable, often brutal demands of the physical economy. The men have to take the physically demanding jobs that pay the primary wage, which by necessity means they're absent.
Let's ground this in that story of Lao Tzu, the father working 12-hour shifts at a logistics hub. In the conventional, idealized narrative of fatherhood, he's the absent one.
But his structural role is profoundly active. His body is his capital, and he spends it daily, often to the point of collapse.
The paradox is just heartbreaking. That expenditure of physical energy is what provides the essential financial foundation, the absolute floor that prevents the family from being completely atomized by poverty.
His physical absence from the home at dinner time, his exhaustion, that is, paradoxically, his greatest economic presence for his family's survival. He's ensuring they have a roof and food, the foundational layer of security.
And for these low-skilled fathers, the provider role is so much more than just a paycheck. It's a deeply held identity. It's central to their status as an adult.
It's the definition of manhood in that context. You hear quotes that really reinforce this. Things like, if I didn't have money, that means I'm a bad dad because I'm not making a living or anything. Or getting up in the morning and grafting all day and then coming home. That's providing.
They directly connect their moral worth as a father with their capacity to endure and graft through physical labor.
And that desperation to fulfill the provider role is only intensified by the very real structural barriers these young men face. We're seeing insecure youth labor markets globally, and data suggests poverty rates have been going up for this specific age group, the 25 to 34-year-olds who are just starting families.
So they face these huge obstacles to achieving secure, full-time employment that actually pays a living wage.
Which forces many into what the research calls the triple burden. They are simultaneously earning, often juggling, multiple low-paid, insecure jobs. They're learning, trying to pick up fragmented skills through piecemeal training, and they're trying to hold a family together despite immense financial strain.
It takes immense fortitude just to stay afloat.
It does. There's an example of young father Andrew who was so demoralized by his precarious situation, struggling with income insecurity, that he found himself contemplating homelessness. That's the level of existential threat that defines their daily experience.
The gulf between the elite father strategizing for a positional advantage and the working class father literally fighting for subsistence. It couldn't be wider. How did fathers get relegated to this strictly financial role? Pre-industrial fatherhood was different, right?
Absolutely. Providing was always a core duty, but it wasn't the sole core identity. Before mass industrialization, fathers were central to the home's emotional ecology and domestic education. Emotional connection was completely congruent with masculinity within the family.
Then came industrialization, urbanization, and the rise of the male breadwinner model that dominated the 20th century.
That shift was catastrophic for the emotional role in the father. The long hours, the long commutes. It physically and psychologically alienated men from the home. Mothers were left to set the emotional climate, and the social construction of men hardened into that of the unemotional peripheral provider,
whose value was measured only by the size of his paycheck.
And today, that legacy is intensified by modern economic necessity. Low-skilled fathers are compelled to work punishingly long hours just to meet basic needs, not to buy luxuries.
The data is stark. One study showed nearly 39% of co-resident fathers aged 25 to 34 with a preschool child work 50 or more hours a week.
50-plus hours. Imagine trying to transition from a 12-hour shift at a logistics hub moving heavy objects on your feet all day to being an emotionally engaged, patient parent.
I can't. That level of physical exhaustion has to compromise your capacity for emotional engagement, even if the desire to be there and connect is strong. The brain and body are they're depleted.
And the research confirms this. This pressure to provide takes an overwhelming priority, often requiring the sacrifice of that emotional connection. The sources show that low-skilled men want to be more emotionally engaged, but they feel compelled by necessity to ensure their family sustenance first.
Which ends up compromising the very paternal relationships they're working so hard to support.
And specific work patterns, like shift work, are particularly damaging. They create stress in the co-parental relationship, which then creates secondary stress that disrupts the father-child bond. It's a vicious cycle.
They regret the long hours, but they feel trapped.
And the key difference remains flexibility. The elite father can choose to deploy his high-value time at home for strategic coaching. The working-class father has no such choice. His time is physically consumed by the industrial machine, leaving only exhaustion and financial anxiety for the family's emotional life.
So we have this stark stratification. The working-class father's deep desire to be a nurturer is constantly undermined by the physical constraints of his job, forcing him back into a breadwinner role that is both his greatest source of identity and the primary barrier to the connection he craves. This brings us from the individual family struggle to the ultimate civilizational scale.
Exactly.
We've established that both types of fathers are reacting to existential economic pressure, one by hyper-intensive presence, the other by necessary draining absence. If both strategies are so draining on the family unit, where does this stratification lead the wider society? This brings us to the long-term cost, what some call the modernity curse.
The West provides a very clear, very sobering cautionary tale here. The modernity curse is rooted in radical individualism, the pursuit of freedom from responsibility.
Freedom from family, from community, from legacy.
And that trajectory leads, almost inevitably, to the atomized individual.
And what are the consequences of this hollow freedom?
It results in what you could call civilizational entropy. When the foundational unit, the family, is strained and starts to break down, the social fabric just unravels. It unravels into isolated, competing particles. This leads to disintegrated communities, decaying social trust. It's a state where society is less than the sum of its parts. It's not a sustainable model for long-term endurance.
And the most immediate measurable sign of this pressure, globally, is historically low birth rates. It's driven by the sheer cost of maintaining a family.
And it's not just the obvious financial strains. The costs are cumulative and complex. We see enormous financial barriers, like housing affordability and the insane cost of childcare. But there's also a cultural strain.
The expectation that parenting has become this intense, full-time project of scheduled activities.
Compounded by a cultural anxiety, a fear of letting children have any genuine independence. This cultural intensity acts as a significant barrier right alongside the financial strain.
And we even see unintended policy consequences adding to this. The sources mention car seat laws, which is such a fascinating example of a subtle, unintentional contraceptive.
It is. It's a seemingly minor detail that reveals a massive systemic truth. These laws mandate large, fixed seats for young children, a policy enacted for a very minor safety benefit, preventing only a handful of deaths each year.
But the design makes it incredibly difficult and expensive for families to fit 3 children into a standard car.
which forces families to stop at 2 children rather than absorb the high cost and hassle of upgrading to a massive SUV or van. The cumulative logistical and financial costs just become prohibitive.
So all these seemingly small costs, financial, time, logistical, cultural, they all add up to make having and raising a family prohibitively expensive. When parents need both incomes just to break even, the traditional model falters and the hyper-intensive model of the elite becomes completely unattainable for everyone else.
It creates a sustainability crisis. We see this in the story of that young couple in the new Tier 1 city who feel the curse thinning their blood. They're struggling to balance a toddler and aging parents while working these punishing, demanding jobs. They're trapped by these cumulative costs and the lack of systemic support.
Which raises the ultimate question of governance. If individual families are trapped in this strategic battle for survival, what is the ultimate aim of the state? It can't just be about measuring the ideological split of chores. That's too superficial.
That's an ideological distraction, and it's unenforceable. The ultimate measure of state capacity has to be its efficacy in reducing the family maintenance cost for all its citizens. This is the institutional intervention that's necessary to fortify the family unit against those fragmenting forces of modernity.
To prevent that social atomization.
Exactly. The elite father, Mr. Chen, he can privately buy support. Private schools, tutors, nannies. But the working class father, Lao Tzu, he's crushed by the absence of that support. The state's role is to bridge this parenting gap.
The state has to use its institutional power to make that resilience universally accessible.
And that means strengthening state capacity through practical, visible means. Investing in superior infrastructure, ensuring efficient, high-quality public services, and crucially, the socialization of support systems.
So we're talking about subsidized childcare that's accessible and high quality, robust healthcare systems, and mechanisms that acknowledge and support intergenerational responsibility, like housing policies that enable families to live near aging parents without huge financial penalties.
The goal here is explicitly social stability and civilizational endurance. The family is recognized not as an isolated unit, but as the fundamental buffer against market pressures and the forces of atomization.
So when the cost of being a family in time, money, and emotional energy is lowered institutionally, the structural resilience of the whole unit is dramatically increased.
Which means the return of fatherhood doesn't have to remain a luxury of the anxious, calculating elite driven only by competition. It can become a universal certainty supported by strong institutional frameworks.
So to pull this all together, modern fatherhood is fundamentally defined by economic stratification. The anxiety-driven intensity of elite fathers is a desperate, calculated defense against global competition.
While the absence of working-class fathers is a structural necessity, dictated by the physical demands of the industrial economy. This stratified return of fatherhood is a profound symptom of unequal systemic pressure. The path to enduring stability lies in the institutional genius of the state to lower the cost of family maintenance, ensuring that the necessary resilience woven into the family unit is universally accessible and sustainable. The civilizational project is complete when securing the family is not a desperate private mover, but a foundational supported norm.